The 7 videos in the series that follows are presentations from the 2024 National Gun Conference. They're given by political and industry leaders about the political problems facing the shooting sports, and they demonstrate two key things. First is there's strong agreement among the presenters about the need to get police out of policy, the need for shooting organisations to get political, and the need for the shooting community to target politicians who do us harm. The second key thing was the very positive feedback that was seen in having Australia's largest shooting organisation, the AASAA, as a key part of the conference, which is an olive branch to the entire shooting community to get more shooting organisations and businesses on board to deal with our challenges head on. We hope you enjoy these presentations and encourage your shooting organisation to join us for the next National Gun Conference, which will be held in 2025. And please share this series with people you know. And links to each of the episodes will be in the description to this video. This is the first presentation given at the 2024 National Gun Conference, and this is by former Senator David Leyonhjelm on the topic, Gun Control is Not About Guns. So David has been involved in politics since the 1970s. He is a long-standing sporting shooter and author of 2 books, one of them on gun control, and there's another one on its way. Now, David was elected to the Senate representing New South Wales at the 2013 election, commencing his term in 2014, and he resigned in 2019. In Parliament, David fought the Adler ban, delaying it for a year alongside others. He also succeeded in securing a 25-year lease on the Malabar Rifle Range in New South Wales, and you can follow David on Twitter or X at David Leyonhjelm. So going to just stop that presentation and we're going to throw to Dave, and bear with me, Dave. I'm just going to, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Leyonhjelm. I was in, as Neil said, I was in the Senate for 5 years, but I'm no longer a senator, so there's nothing quite as as being an ex-senator. But the firearms issue is still close to my heart. One of the reasons for that is that Australians today face unprecedented levels of gun control. In the history of this country, the restrictions on firearm ownership and use have never been so broad or so restrictive. Now, the purpose of today's conference is to consider why that is the case and what might be done about it. We're not here primarily to argue the case, though. Those involved in this conference, those listening, are already on our side. There's no point preaching to them. Our problem is that many people, perhaps even a majority of Australians, instinctively believe the case for gun control is so obvious that it needs no justification. Any report of gun deaths, whether it's murder or suicide, and certainly every multiple shooting, is sufficient to prompt a shaking of heads in disbelief that governments have failed to introduce adequate gun control. As they see it, proper gun control would bring an end to such events, resulting in a safer and kinder society. Some might interpret that as a longing for less violent crime, something that can be objectively measured. But in fact, few actually care about the facts. As far as actual crime is concerned, burglaries and car thefts are far more likely to bother them. What we're really talking about is perceptions, feelings, and it is only about guns. Murders in which other methods are used, such as knives or flammable liquids, rarely prompt demands for their control, irrespective of the number of casualties. In fact, for quite a lot of people, it's an obsession, arguably a psychological illness. The term hoplophobia is the term applied to it. And yet, as we all know, guns are inanimate objects with no minds of their own. They do not suddenly jump up and kill people, nor do they teleport homicidal thoughts into the minds of the people who own or use them. When pressed as to what specific gun control measures they believe would create a safer society, most people struggle. Of course, they will tell you a tough approach is important, but when it comes to details, they don't know. If you ask them to explain the current gun laws, almost none of them could do it. Never having owned a gun, they've never had to deal with the laws. If you ask them what additional measures do they believe would be effective, they rarely have any concrete suggestions. If they do, it's generally to suggest measures that are already in place. I've asked people that exact question on multiple occasions, and it is remarkable how often that occurs. When it's pointed out that Australia's gun laws made no difference to the rate of gun deaths or to the number of mass shootings, they reject the facts. That couldn't be right, they say. It doesn't feel right. Quite a lot of gun control advocates believe the solution is civilian disarmament. If guns are all banned, they say, they couldn't kill anyone. Make guns illegal, like drugs. But what, you might ask, should be done about the police and military? Should they also be disarmed? Most will say no, that those categories should continue to have guns. That means only the government will have guns. When you ask, would you actually feel safer knowing that the only people with guns are the police and military, plus criminals, they get uncomfortable. Not when you put it that way. But then, what about farmers and others who need to destroy sick or injured livestock? Wouldn't it be cruel if they couldn't have them? And what about security guards? Shouldn't cash, jewellery, or other valuables be protected? And of course, nobody has any answers when it comes to illegal guns. The government suggests there are a quarter of a million of those, but that's a very uninformed guess. In my book on gun control, I show why it could be around 3 million, perhaps more. The fact is, most of the opposition to gun ownership is irrational, based on ignorance and devoid of facts. For most people, their only knowledge of guns is what they've seen on television and in movies. As a result, they think anybody can just pick up a gun, pull the trigger and kill someone. They have no understanding of ammunition. As far as they know, any bullet will go in any gun. They have no idea about aiming, safety catches and triggers. In Australia, I'd guess less than 1 in 20 have ever fired a gun. They don't know what it feels like or sounds like. And there are many consequences of this ignorance. The vilification of the AR-15 is an example, although it's primarily in the United States because we can no longer have them. But if you try telling someone it's the equivalent of a Mini-14, they won't know what you're talking about. It's the same with suppressors. In the movies, suppressors are used by assassins and make guns virtually silent. They have simply no idea how loud guns normally are on the damage they can do to hearing. They have no idea that suppressors are a health and safety issue. They firmly believe suppressors are only used for sinister purposes and have no positive benefits. And of course, public servants, who are in fact primarily responsible for coming up with most government policies, not politicians most of the time, are no better informed. They share the same myths held by the general public. I've had public servants tell me they think it's positive to make it more and more difficult to own guns so people will give up. Somehow they think that's a good idea. The lack of knowledge of guns includes a lot of police. You see that whenever there is an incident involving a gun. Massive overreactions are typical. Those of us who know about guns laugh our heads off, but there's not many of us. What we are talking about is gun control based on feelings, not facts, on emotions, not reason. This is very much a 21st century phenomenon. Only this century was the law invoked to protect people from offence and hurt feelings. Previously, we did not hear demands for safe spaces, for freedom from microaggressions or from hate speech. It used to be that we didn't give offence, but we might choose to take it. These days, that is one of the key motivations for gun control. People simply do not like guns. When they say, I'm afraid of guns or guns offend me, we can no longer tell them it's their problem and to get over it. Now it's our problem. What's not new is weapons control. Keeping certain weapons out of the hands of certain people has been a policy of governments for thousands of years. Sometimes it was intended to reduce crime, but far more often it was political. Back in the times of the Romans, which of course had endless political intrigues, certain types of swords were deemed unsuitable for civilians and were restricted to soldiers. In Elizabethan England, it was similar. Certain types of swords were regarded as only suitable for criminal purposes and were therefore prohibited, except that didn't apply to gentlemen, only the common people. And once guns were invented, this type of thinking became very common. In Australia, the first gun control laws were aimed at keeping guns out of the hands of Aborigines. In New Zealand, gun control laws were first introduced to prevent them from falling into the hands of Maoris. In America, slaves were of course not permitted to own guns. After the Civil War, state governments went to great lengths to prevent freed slaves from owning guns. Indeed, that lasted right up to the 1960s. But the history of gun control is not limited just to racism. It is also full of cases of the authorities being determined to prevent the people from threatening their power. For example, the first serious gun laws in Great Britain were in 1920 and aimed at preventing returned soldiers from gaining access to guns. Soldiers had been instrumental in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia just 3 years earlier, and rebellious soldiers played a significant role in civil strife in post-war Germany. The British government didn't want soldiers with ideas and guns getting involved in politics, hence the ban. Perhaps the most telling point is that every single genocide in the 20th century was preceded by or accompanied by harsh gun control. I'll just mention a few of the main ones. The massacre of the Armenians by the Turks, the gulags and forced starvation of Ukrainians and Russians by Stalin, the massacre of the Jews by the Nazis. Jews were specifically prohibited from owning guns. The arrest and elimination of political opponents by the nationalist Chinese government. The arrest and elimination of counter-revolutionary criminals in communist China. The massacre of Mayans in Guatemala. The massacre of Christians in Uganda. The killing fields of the Pol Pot regime in Cambodia. And the massacre of the Tutsis by the Hutu in Rwanda. Everyone, without exception, was accompanied by tough gun control. The same tough gun control that people in our governments advocate, which they somehow want us to believe will make us safer. Gun control has long been mainly about control rather than guns. And in Australia, we are being subjected to more and more control. We took a massive loss in 1997 and 2002 with the Howard gun laws. A lot of rifles, pistols, and shotguns that were available in other countries, including the UK and New Zealand, we are not permitted to own rifles, shotguns, pistols. We can't even have semi-automatic rimfire rifles, which both New Zealand and the UK still allow. We can't carry anything for our own protection, not even a pocket knife. We're constantly harassed about safe storage and transport of firearms. We can't have plastic water squirters if they look like real prohibited guns. The Commonwealth Games are likely to drop shooting. Retaining shooting in the Olympics is a constant struggle. They are slowly but surely turning the screws on us. Even being in the Senate, as I was for 5 years, is not enough to turn the tide. I managed to secure a long-term lease for Malabar Rifle Range, but that was relatively uncontroversial. On lever-action shotguns, in other words, the Adler issue, the best I could do was delay the recategorisation for 12 months. It was very disheartening. And yet, no matter how much they torture the statistics, the evidence against guns never gets any stronger. There seems to be only two countries in the world, America and Australia. If we didn't have our gun laws, we'd be like America. No other alternative is admissible. The fact that the Czech Republic has gun laws similar to America and a lower murder rate than Australia is irrelevant. Most advocates couldn't find the country on a map. The fact that the state of Vermont in America has never had any gun laws and yet has a lower murder rate than Australia's, it's also irrelevant. Or that the cities and states with the toughest gun laws in America are also mostly where the worst gun violence occurs. Doesn't count. And if you take an international perspective and compare the toughness of gun laws with gun violence or murder rates, you find no correlation. Doesn't matter. All the evidence shows that gun laws and murder rates are independent variables. That is, they have no impact on each other. If you change one, you don't change the other. Doesn't count. If you could just get that recognised, though, if we could just get that recognised, though, things might change. But we are dealing, as I said, with ignorance and feelings. Speakers today will describe in more detail how the screws are turning. You will also hear various thoughts on what can be done to turn back the tide, what might be done to turn back the tide, what's worked in the past, and what might work in the future. We're not here to pretend we have the answers, but we think it's time to ask the right questions at least. We hope it leads to something that makes a difference. Thank you very much for your interest and your attention.
Okay, thank you, Dave, and you're quite right, even water pistols are almost off, certainly a taboo. So this is really an opportunity now just to have a bit of a panel discussion, and I think in order to do that I need to unmute people. So if there's anybody who would like to ask a question, make a comment.
Well, I'm going to pick up on one if I can, Neil.
Sure.
David just mentioned the crazy concept, and this is not one that I've actually used or honed in on before, but a very good discussion point, particularly in the political arena when we're talking about facts and data and keeping away from the emotion. The Australia-United States comparison, but we never look at, say, Switzerland or the Czech Republic. I mean, there is two classic examples whereby significant firearm ownership by the ordinary people does not result in mass murder, crime in the streets, all these sorts of problems. In fact, actually, there is less crime. And if you drill down into parts of the United States where regional USA, the crime is very, very low. You know, the Los Angeles, the Chicagos, etc., they blow the numbers right up. So that's something we don't talk about enough. And civilian firearm ownership does not equal madness, mayhem, and murder. And I would have to say, David, that was actually a very well stated point. It's always in the back of our mind, but we don't stop to talk about it much in the public arena and get that even published in the mainstream media. You know, why is it we say, oh, we don't want to be like America? Well, I actually think we want to be a lot like America, just parts of it, not the bad parts. So I don't think guns is the problem. There is in countries or even cities here in Australia or parts of cities where there's problems. It's another problem. It's not the gun. It's not the cars. It's not the trucks. It's not the any other method of harming individuals, knives, fire. It's a cultural problem or it's a criminal problem, and I think we probably need to sort of expand the void between those two things so that people can't conflate them, I suppose, is probably the thing we should be aiming for in our discussions in the media and with politicians.
Okay, thank you for that. And yeah, I think you use the word culture. I think that goes right to the heart of a lot of our problems.